y'all. Well, I'm your host with my two co-hosts. I'm Dom. I got Tim and Tamon, Tamon and Biv with me. And I got a couple of special guests with me. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But before we do that, I want to make sure that you guys go on our Facebook page and make sure that you share and tell a friend that we are live. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Instagram, on Twitter, and make sure that you go ahead and listen to us on Spotify. Without further ado, I am going to introduce my guest, and I'm going to go ahead and start with Miss Cairo Person. I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and what you do.
Okay, thanks for having me on. My name is Cairo Person. I'm based in California and I do community work. I'm a co-founder of an organization called We-Remember, and primarily we're just trying to educate folks about Black history, and making sure they can find ways to know their history, love themselves, and find ways to give back to the community here in the Bay Area.
That's awesome. That's awesome. We definitely want to dive right into a lot of that stuff and talk about that. But we're gonna go right to Mr. Jeffrey Benson. Go ahead and introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Benson. I'm from Seaford, Delaware. I work heavily in the community between business, politics, and community advocacy. I currently serve on the Seaford School District Board of Education. It's my second term, and I look to hear more about what everybody else is doing within their communities and how I can add value in your process.
Great. All right. And Mr. Franklin, you can go and tell us a little bit about yourself, sir.
Cool. My name is Kamau Franklin, originally from Brooklyn, New York. I used to be a practicing attorney. I've been a grassroots community organizer for about 25 years. I'm the founder of an organization called Community Movement Builders that has 6 chapters throughout the country. We do what we call community organizing work, primarily right now against gentrification and police brutality. And we also do what we call sustainable development, which is developing cooperatives to create alternative economic enterprises that we can hopefully build to scale to support our larger Black community.
Thank you, sir. And y'all know I'm going to introduce my two co-hosts. I got Biv. Go ahead, Biv, say something to the people.
Good evening, everybody. Just get your pens and your paper together, take down some notes, and find out some things that you can do to help your community. This evening we got 2 gentlemen and a young lady with us that's gonna drop some gems for you. So just come along for the ride.
Yes, sir. Tim one.
Hey man, I'm just ready to get things started, man. Everyone knows. Let's get going.
Let's get it. All right. So the first question we had for you guys is, how did you become involved in this type of work? What inspired you to continue working in activism in your community? And we can start with ladies first.
So how I got started. I was raised in a household where social justice was the focal point. My father is from Harlem, and so he was a big proponent of Malcolm X's teachings. And so being raised in the Bay, I'm originally from San Francisco, now living in Oakland, home of the Black Panthers. And so not only was I being raised with the sense of pride, but I was also being indoctrinated in a community that was about activism. And so those 2 things really molded me into really trying to give back to my community. I've always been about ancestral practices, and definitely been about giving back and touching back into our roots, getting back to basics of who we are as a people. And so having that spirituality, having what was taught in the home and being in community made me really want to dive in and continue doing community work. And so that was the foundation. I went to school to study journalism, and the focus of that was to tell our stories. I believe that when I was studying journalism and studying broadcast journalism, what I found in the media was that the narrative needed to change. What the media was portraying about Black people, our Black community across the nation, actually across the African diaspora, was incorrect, and that imaging and the stories being told needed to be changed. And so studied journalism, went into media, and just continue to do the work. And that's where I am now.
I think that's great. Especially like you said, you wanted to give back and educate our Black community and our Black people, especially about the ancestors and the whole spirituality of it. I think that's awesome, especially the way that a lot of people in a time where a lot of people are searching for that. Yeah, I mean, talking about the Black and brown community, they're searching for where they come from, where we're what our heritage is, what our ancestors are. So I think that just giving back and pouring into them is something that a lot of us are yearning for right now.
Agreed.
Mr. Benson.
I got into community work sort of, I don't want to say by accident, but I had, when I left from the area from after I graduated from high school, I was in the military and traveled the states in different countries. But slowly but surely, something was calling me back home to be able to provide some of the experiences that I've seen. And when I came home, I found that our community was very fragmented. Individuals were from people that I once knew, or the community that I once knew, it wasn't the same. It wasn't community oriented anymore. Everyone was on an island doing their own thing. And so, I would go to certain individuals that I felt were either community leaders or had authority to kind of express my ideas and frustrations. And I soon realized that, I wouldn't say they were falling on deaf ears, but it wasn't moving in the pace that I wanted it to move. So then I was like, well, I'm no longer going to, complain about a situation. I'm going to jump in and get involved. And what I found and I realized, and this is what I tell everyone that I encounter, you don't need permission to do the right thing. In fact, the individuals, if you're looking for approval from, say, your city or whatever the case may be, they should be seeking you out, and which that's what happens on my end now, because you have the ideas, you have your ear to the ground and your finger on the pulse of what the community needs and wants. And so when I have an idea, I just produce. I get with other community leaders or organizations that have the resources that I need to execute the plan and project that I'm trying to convey at the time. And so, like I said, it wasn't an accident, but it was more so out of frustration where I wasn't getting the results that I felt needed to be done. So it was like, well, I'll do it. And when I started seeing that I had the power to do it, and started receiving results, what ended up happening was you become the community leader that individuals seek. From whether it's your governor or your local clergy person. Whenever there's an issue or a challenge in the area, they're going to seek you out. So I would say, when you do take on that role, whether directly or indirectly, be prepared for those phone calls and for individuals to pull on you.
That's good. I got a question I'm gonna ask you after this, but but I'm gonna get to Mr. Franklin. Tell us a little bit about himself and how he got into this type of work.
Yeah. So I grew up in pre-gentrified Brooklyn. My mom is from Charleston, South Carolina, and she grew up during Jim Crow. And she would tell us stories about living under Jim Crow. In particular, she had a story about when she was in a whites-only playground with her friends, got chased out by a cop and was slower than the rest of her friends, and she got hit in the back. And to this day, my mother carries a huge scar on her back from that incident. And so she would talk about those days, and that brought up some curiosity. And I think also mixed with that is, even in spite of the brutality that she not only witnessed, but was subject to firsthand, like a lot of us as a people, there was still a certain aura around whiteness. So when my mother decided to have kids, she lightened her kids up, and that was on purpose, right? And so when you hear those stories, when you hear that, it boggles your mind that you live in a society that people feel like, and they're not necessarily even wrong, right? That in order for their kids to have a better chance in life, that they have to be closer to the very people that are oppressing you, right? That was part of her decision-making process. So that's a mind-blowing kind of thing. This got me reading, and I think, like the sister said, like I started reading Malcolm, right? And this, you know, again, I'm an older dude, so this is in the late 80s and all that kind of stuff. So that was, you know, Malcolm was kind of back in vogue in some ways, but started reading Malcolm, read people like Noam Chomsky, and started, and you know, we grew up working class, poor, like in the projects. And so it started to help me realize that our communities, the way they are no accident. It's not because we are dumb or ignorant or we're slow or we are individually not putting our best foot forward or not working our way up our bootstraps. Our communities are the way they are because others benefit from them, and those other people have power. And so for me, it made me a radical organizer who always thought about, in terms of my work and my life's mission, how do we as a people gain power? And that can only be done in terms of my own estimation of what I read and what I've studied and what I practice, is that we must defeat white supremacy and we must defeat capitalism. Because those are the things that subject us to the oppression that we face as a people. And so that's the stuff that's driven me for the last 20, 25 years to be involved in a whole host of different activities and organizations that have worked around the issues of Black self-determination and liberation, including being able to work with ex-Panthers, supporting political prisoners, working again on alternative to economics, doing cop watches, doing different various things in the community that can build grassroots institutions that can build us power.
Listen, I love it. One of the things that I hear from everybody, right? And even with us starting to speak on it, is passion. The reason that we've all decided to do certain things and to create platforms to create awareness in our communities, in the Black and Brown community, is passion. We're all passionate about our people, and we're all tired of certain things. We're tired of the injustices. We're tired of things not being equal. We're tired of like waiting on people to do things, and we took action to actually step out and do things. So I love that that we're all passionate about, and we all have experiences that we can draw from that make us passionate about the things that we are passionate about. So before I move on, I wanted to know if Taman and Biv had something.
I mean, I love what each and every one of you guys are doing in the community. I mean, and one of the things that, like Dom said, it starts with passion and education as well. I mean, all three of you guys are educated. One of the questions that I have, if I can ask before Biv asks his question, is you guys seem like, in a sense, you took that step forward. What would you say to someone that has the heart to do it, but in a sense is an introvert, where they have it in their heart to do so, but at the same time their personality isn't set up to kind of, you have to be in the limelight or the foot of things. Like Jeff said, people would have to be calling you, but that's not your personality. What would you say to those that want to actually be in these types of organizations? Now, and I'll start with ladies first.
No, I actually appreciate that question. So currently, due to what we've been seeing for the civil unrest for this summer, my organization did some initiatives, and one of them being a mentoring program for young mentors who are new, or excuse me, young mentees, young adults who are new to activism, who want to be, they're passionate, right? They're passionate, they want to get involved, but they don't know how to do so, or they're introvert, right? And what I'm finding and learning on the way as we have our program moving forward, and this is actually, we're starting our second cohort of mentees, is that there is a place for you. You don't have to be out in the streets. If we're going to be talking about protesting, you don't have to be out in the streets. There is a place for you in any type of movement. If you can contribute, if you have skill sets that are behind a computer, right, behind a screen, if there's a skill set to teach someone, if there's a skill set to even just have your voice heard by spitting poetry, there is a place for people who want to be involved. And that's what I'm noticing, especially with young folks. Like that's what my organization is geared towards, is the young kids, is the young adults, the babies, because they're the ones who are going to be taking the torch. But at the same time, they're the ones who need to be educated and guided and make sure they're their best selves when they're showing up.
I would definitely agree on that. Just speaking on, I mean, I have 3 younger brothers, and they, in a sense, they see what's going on, and a couple of them, they want their voices heard, but at the same time, they don't know how to go about it, and they don't want to offend their friends. They don't want to offend they don't want to look crazy. It's like you said, for the babies, they need to understand. Now, continue on with Mr. Benson. You can answer that.
I would say I'm an introvert. Really, I consider myself a hybrid. I know how to turn it on and turn it off when I need to. And what I started to do is, like, most people, especially introverts, are afraid of public speaking. So I just started saying yes to everything. And I figured, no matter how many times I may jack up, I'll just get better at it, until I said, I get on the big stage and I could have an Obama moment, and set the place on fire. But what I will say is, like Mrs. Person said, is there is a place for individuals who want to be in the fight and maybe not be up front. What I will say to that, though, is an individual, just like I was saying about myself, if you are the person with the vision, nobody's going to be able to drive your vision like you. And so you're going to have to step up and lead and push it, even if it's you bringing the people together and organizing and saying, okay, hey, I may not be the best speaker, but you are an orator. And so I need you to convey this. You do this well as far as marketing. You know how to galvanize individuals. And so internally, you're working your vision amongst your peers or your team or whatever, even though you may not be in the forefront. For me, I just felt that it's easier for me to push and have the voice that's needed in our particular community, because once again, I can't trust somebody else to fulfill what it is, the fire that I have in my belly, and to be able to convey it to the rest of the community. But what I can do is get resources from other individuals and strengths. And myself, I love to surround myself with individuals that are, smarter than me, that highlight my strengths, but also isolate my weaknesses. And so I strategically, and I am intentional with certain individuals that I place around me, especially when I'm working on certain projects. So, that's an insecurity of mine, but I understand what my weaknesses are and who has those strengths. So I build my team around me, and it's not the whole team, but it's specifically for different projects. So I would say, in a nutshell, find what you're good at, be able to push that and drive that home, and then surround yourself with other individuals that, have the strengths that you lack.
Definitely of that, especially the orator part. I'm not good at speaking, so I need me a Louis Farrakhan. I can write down what I say and get him somebody to say that. But go ahead, Mr. Franklin.
Brother, with that voice of yours, you're not a good speaker?
No, not
got
at
that
all.
Voice. You need to.
I can turn it off and on.
I was gonna say, I'm gonna throw a script in front of you. With that voice, you can drive some folks. But I would say quickly, I mean, I agree with what folks said. I only add that, movement work, I think is something that folks are alluding to or saying. It's varied, right? Movement work, liberation work is not something where you only need people who can speak. It's not something where you only need people who can write. You need folks who can do many different tasks. And the key to movement work is logistics. You need folks who can show up, right? Folks who can do things and get things done. And that sometimes at that level, it's a way for people to get involved, and you can work around skill building as you go. Organizing simple things or rallies or demonstrations or workshops or meetings, driving projects. Those are things that folks can always learn to do, because I don't think, I think organizing is a great equalizer in terms of skill base. If you're passionate about your folks or you want to do something about your folks, you can learn the rest. And so I think there's an opening, and I think a lot of young people are jumping in, obviously, to movement activity. If I worry about anything, it's almost that I think there are folks who get so passionate that they don't know how to pace themselves and they get burnt out. After, I've known folks, I'm not even making this up. They've done 2 rallies and they feel like they've done everything that they could possibly do. And I'm like, you burnt out already, son? You 15 years old, I don't understand. But, so I think there's a ways in which we have to make sure that folks feel supported, taken care of, and that they feel like their voice is heard also. And I think that's the other thing for me about organizing or movement building, is that you have to create institutions that are democratic so that folks even feel like their voice is being heard as they participate. So they're not just being told what to do, but they're telling you how the action should go forth, or giving ideas. Doesn't mean every idea is equal, but it means the opportunities are there for people to voice their opinions and have confidence that they are fully participating in the work that's at hand, as opposed to they're in some corporate structure themselves that they get at their job, right? So for me, movement activity is about how do we get folks to be fully invested, again, in ideas that involve the liberation of our folks.
So just to summarize pretty much everything of what everyone is saying, if anyone is an introvert or someone who doesn't feel like their voice will be heard, you need to get around like-minded people who see the vision the same way that you do. And once you get gather some people together, organize some things together, and fail forward, in a sense, to where you figure it out on the way. And it's based on informing yourself. Back to what this person said, informing yourself and being educated, and from a young person's level, the more you're educated, that the more you're a weapon in a sense. But I'll go ahead and let Bev or Dom have their question. Y'all just sit out here and just leave me hanging.
So no, I know Bill had a question. But the question I had, because Mr. Person, he said something when he came home that everybody was on their island, like, and it didn't look like community. So one of the questions that I had is, what does community look like? What does community mean to you guys?
Is this to me? Is it we going around?
This out there to everybody. So, but since you answer, we can you can answer first.
Okay. Well, I would say Mr. Franklin talked about being pre-gentrification. You said Brooklyn, sir? So community is going to be different for him than it would be, say, to myself. He's from a bigger city, right? And then now what he's seeing is the corporate structure different than what it was then, right? Myself, Taman, and Biv, we grew up together, best friends, went to school together. Our community, small, you know what I mean? So to give you an example, Seaford's about 7,500 within the town limits. And then in the country, maybe about 20,000 people. So that's barely scratching the surface for Brooklyn. And so what I meant by what does community look like? Community looks like a neighborhood, individuals taking care of people's kids. If I see your kid on the street or whatever, I give them a ride or I give them encouraging words. If I see a family in need financially or whatever the case may be, even if I don't have it, I help provide resources to get them in a place where they can be empowered. And, we all have down moments, whatever it is. It could be emotional, it could be financial, it could be spiritual, whatever the case may be. And as a community, we should be able to, without ostracizing anyone, helping individuals, giving them a hand up. I didn't see that. When I came home, I just seen, the school system was, in shambles. Our sports team, which was a thriving sports powerhouse in the community, because sports usually brings the community together, that was fragmented. We're still actually seeing the having the remnants of that. And we had DuPont. Once again, DuPont had left right before we had graduated, but when you take 5,000 to 6,000 jobs out of a community, it's like a vacuum, and so it becomes a ghost town with no economic engine to push it. So quite naturally, poverty creeps in, and then drug abuse and use, the selling of drugs, those things come in, and so you could sit back and watch it overtake you. And this place that you raise your family in and you have family members in, or you can say enough is enough, and we're going to chip at the bit and start to gain traction, little by little. And so I know that, I guess, framing or answering the question is a little bit all over the place. It wasn't a concise answer, but I think in a nutshell, it's different. It depends on where you're from. Like for us, it wasn't all black or all white. We were a melting pot. So, we have Black African Americans, we have Caucasians, we have Haitian Americans, we have Asian Americans, Hispanics. It's all a melting pot. We all grew up together, played sports together, hung out together. So for me, all of those are my family, and so if one person is being oppressed, then, you're actually oppressing me as well, because I feel their pain. Our place is not big enough for us to be, this is your side of the town, or whatever the case would be. We all kind of live in the same area. Our town's not big enough. So I would say when you have that type of melting pot, you want to make sure that everybody's winning. And specifically our youth, they don't have the memories that we have. So what they're seeing, they're perpetuating what it is now, not what the past is. And if everybody else that I grew up with left, then we're going to really have a problem, because the seniors, they're dying out. The youth, they don't know what the past was. They're just going to continue to do what they see. And that could be a detriment to your community. And me personally, I just refuse to allow that to happen.
You weren't all over the place. I think you hit right on with the question, and then exactly my mind set with asking the question.
Can I just say that I really do appreciate Mr. Benson, Mr. Franklin's energy. I'm over here just shaking my head like,
Yes.
But I mean, my definition is very simple. I believe we're having community right now. I believe not only what Mr. Benson said about your neighborhood, that is a community. I do feel like community is my Black folks. Like like that is my community. Community to me is being uplifting, responsible, supportive, creating dialogue. That's community to me. A place where some of us do share the same ideologies, some of us don't. But we are, I shouldn't even use this phrase, in this together, because I think it's being very coined, but yeah, community is something where it's where responsibility is.
Love it.
I mean, for me, as I think about the word community in a broader sense, when I think about community, I do think about Black people in the United States and Black people in the diaspora, and as a Pan-Africanist, Black folks in Africa, and what we need to do worldwide, right? So that for me is my first definition of what community is. Now there's other rings of what community is definitely what folks are saying, whether it's in an organization, a friendship circle, family, local communities, and so forth. But at the sort of largest level for me, because of my politics and my political education, community to me is what do we as a people need to do to order to get power, right? And so when I think about what makes a successful community is a community with power, a community that has control over the institutions that are in its community, institutions that can decide life or death institutions that educate, institutions that are responsible for social service needs, electoral institutions. If you don't control those institutions, then you don't have community. You're oppressed, right? That's what community is. Community is about power. And if you don't have the power to do something, if you don't have the power and the resources to say, I want this in my community and I don't want that in my community, then you are oppressed and you don't have control. So for me, a community that is doing well is a community with power. It's a community that controls resources. It's a community that decides what's the curriculum of the school that my children go to that I want them to learn, as opposed to what somebody from outside my community is telling me they should learn, right? My community would never, if I controlled my educational resources, they would never be learning about the founding fathers as these great people who freed the so-called slaves and so forth. They would be learning about those people as oppressors, and their founding fathers would be people like Harriet Tubman and Nat Turner and so forth, particularly within the American context, right? So for me, it's about the power to control, the power to understand, and the power for folks to have the resources that they need economically, politically, socially, to make sure that their lives are vibrant, that they can do the things that they need to do. And that for me comes through community organizing, and it comes through sort of the strength of trying to figure out how do we make those moves and do those things together. And so that's my definition of from the largest to a smaller level of like what community looks like.
Oh, that's awesome. Cairo, you had something?
I wanted to ask a question. Is it okay to ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. To Mr. Franklin, because I'm vibing. I really am. And so, my question is, do you think we are in community now, Black people here on this land? And do you think we can get to community? If we're not here now, if we're not in community now, can we get there? Do you see that?
I mean, I think there's aspects of us that are in community, right? There's no such thing as everybody being in community, because you have people, again, from a political lens and or an economic lens, who feel like they have different needs than, let's say, the majority of the working class population of Black people, right? So there may be some things that we're in community with around culture, but we may not be in community with around economic needs or division of wealth and that kind of thing. So I think that's, I think what we should be striving for, if I'm to be so presumptuous in terms of organizing, is a critical mass of Black folks, and to create models to show folks what community looks like, right? Not only sort of like what it looks like intellectually, as in us agreeing with each other on certain ideological issues, but what are those models of community that we're saying could make us do better than what we are now? So what are the, again, in my case, what are the alternative economic engines that we can drive that can show our folks that we can control resources? And why don't we have more cooperative grocery stores, which brings us more into community, and it brings us more into control of our food supply, and it's a demonstration of power, right? I think aspects of direct democracy in terms of how you run things electorally speaking, as opposed to just thinking you can vote for somebody and then they will fulfill your needs as opposed to fulfilling their own individual agendas, that brings community, because we start thinking about what we need to control and how we need to do it. So I think there is in some ways, because there's a lot of shared history, particularly for Africans who were enslaved and brought here. But again, I think that extends to Africans who were brought all over the Western Hemisphere and still on the continent and so forth. But I guess in particular, there's a shared history here of folks who can point back to sort of ancestral heroes that we may have and that we look towards. So there's definitely a culture of community, a history that says that we have community. But I think along the lines, and I'll shut up after this, along the lines, because of the different ways in which we've interpreted what freedom means for us, right? What liberation means for us, that there's obviously been a loss of community in a lot of ways, because we have folks who are saying different things mean freedom or liberation for me or us. And I think those things are in conflict and can lead to conflict, and potentially should lead to some conflict, to be honest, right? So I think it's not a community as in all of us are going to all get on the same page, but it's community as in there's a need for a majority of us who are not rich in this country to understand how community works and how power can help you support and give you community, as opposed to thinking that just because you live next to somebody, that's what community means, right? I hope that answers. I'm sorry.
No, you answered. Oh, you answered. Yeah, I think you answered the question. And I'll tell you this: you are walking knowledge on this topic for us. So, whenever you want to talk and you want to keep talking, I'm loving it. But the reason I asked that question about what community looks like or what community means to you guys, because I think that we all, like you said, we all may have a different definition. But to me, community, I think all of you guys hit on it. But community means accountability. Like, what do you do? How do you hold yourself accountable or each other accountable in your own communities? I think about like when we talk about like policing our own communities, and to me, it just says it just speaks to like holding each other accountable in our own communities. We don't have to look outside of our own community to do X, Y, and Z, or to bring in somebody to do X, Y, and Z. But if we police our own communities or we hold ourselves accountable in our own communities, then that's when we have power. And that's when we have structure that Mr. Benson is talking about. We have an infrastructure that now the people that are coming up behind us, that there's something in place that they know how to follow it, right? Or if like Mr. Benson, Mr. Franklin is talking about, if there's a structure in place, we know what power looks like, and we know that how powerful we are, so we don't give that power away. I think that when we look at community now, what Ms. Person has said, when I look at community now, we don't have that, especially in the Black and Brown community. And I'll throw a basketball reference in there because we were just talking about it. These are millionaires on a big stage, on a grand stage, and it looked like they weren't on the same page. You know what I mean? And we talk about that in the Black and Brown community. These are people that should have who run teams, who should have some kind of structure, that should have some kind of order when it comes to like wanting to fight for something. And to see them struggle with doing that, they put on the front to us to say that they had it all together, but when things start coming up from behind the scenes, we see that they didn't have it all together. And I think that that speaks to the Black and Brown community. We need that community. We need that place where we are all on the same page. We need more power. We need more structure. So to answer Ms. Person's question, in some cases, I don't think that we have community in the Black and Brown community because we're all over the place. Like Mr. Benson said, we're all on our own islands, and we aren't all fighting for the same thing, and we aren't all trying to do the same thing.
And I don't mind. I like to jump in real quick and add, because I think that is a perfect example of kind of the rings of community that that we all have to deal with. Is again, you have. I think you're right. We had these folks who had an opportunity to create something or do something which would have been unprecedented. It would have cost them some dollars maybe in the short term, but in the long term, it would have created a watershed moment of community, right? Of everybody feeling like they're in it together. But again, because there are certain class divisions, which can be expected, they went so far, but pulled back because the other folks who were in a certain other economic Black community with them actually supported them pulling back, i.e. Former President Obama and Michael Jordan, right? As two well-respected, rich Black folks who talked folks in their ear and said, don't strike, right? Come back and then ask for resources, but come back and play the game, right? Which took, I made some commentary about how this was a moment where people were doing something that even Muhammad Ali had not fully done at the height of his being banned from his sport for refusing to enter the military during the draft and go fight in Vietnam. And then folks argued against that Ali had done much more. And I was like, of course he did much more, but this is an important precedent. And then 25 minutes later, they just pulled the rug out of my whole argument. And I had to go back and go like, sorry, Ali, you know what I mean? So, but I mean, it's a serious thing. It's, I think in a lot of ways that we should not be dependent on athletes and entertainers to drive what community looks like for us. And I think that's also something that we need to work on as a larger community, which speaks about our powerlessness in terms of dictating who gets to speak and who gets to sort of develop what community looks like for us, because our community is too much driven by youth culture, which is driven by corporate profits in terms of some of the hip hop stuff that happens, but also again by athletes and entertainers, people who should have a voice, but are not well studied enough to be the leading voices that folks go to on these issues, as corporate media usually does.
I had another question that stemmed from something that Taman said, if you don't mind, before you jump on, or if you had a question, Taman, you can jump in there.
Well, I just wanted to add on my little 2 cents. I think it's a collection of everything of what you guys said as far as not being together, and I think it stems from the individualism, in a sense, to where it's a go back to classism. It's us against them. It's always pitting one against another, and that's where the non-unity comes from, as far as the mistrust as well. Once someone gets into a level, we criticize the things and what they do and nitpick of what they do, whether it be in an instance where I'm a big hip hop head. So Jay-Z, for instance, right? Nobody sees, I think Jeff had actually shared something to where he had made either a statement or the entrepreneur's song, and a couple of lines that he had in it. And it was like, well, it was so many negative comments as far as the tweets is concerned, but it's like he had growth. And for one, we shouldn't be looking at him and nitpicking of what he's doing. What exactly are you doing to come together, like Mr. Franklin said, as far as not looking to them as an example, but actually doing the work yourself and being unified together, and not having that individual mindset of it just being all about you and not being able to pull your brother up, especially when we understand that in this country we're the minority, right? So we should stick together more than anything. And we have different people coming from different countries coming together and having the model to where I set this up, I run this, I get money, I bring you in, we do it this way, and it's a pattern. And then it infiltrates our community to where we're the minority in these communities, whether it be a little town like Seaford or a town like Brooklyn, to where it now becomes to where opportunities are looking at investors, whether it be from India, whether it be from China, whether it be from these different countries, and they're setting up shop. And it's to me, it's just a matter of cutting out the individual mindset and having a unity mindset the same way that other communities around us have.
Can I add to the topic of the individualism? I think, we're operating under a Eurocentric power structure. I mean, we're operating out of capitalism. And so here we are as Black people, especially in this country, living under their structure. And I think it's rejecting who we are in our spirit. I believe as Africans before colonialism, there was unity. We were in tribes, we depended on one another. And now we're here operating in a system that doesn't fit us. And I feel like our spirit is rejecting it, but we're just operating. And I think that's why we see a lot of resistance, although we are still modeling the structure that we've been placed up in. But yes, I do agree about the individualism that you mentioned.
Question, go ahead, Biv, you had something?
Yeah, I had something. We have mentioned gentrification earlier, and when Black people hear the word gentrification, we always think of it in a negative sense. Is there a way for gentrification to be a positivity within the Black community?
Now, I can go further.
But, please do.
I mean, the answer is no, because what gentrification is, it is someone else, again, outside of your community, to use the buzzwords of the night, making decisions about what's useful for your community and what's not useful. So it's folks coming in terms of like putting a Starbucks or putting mixed income housing or destroying public housing. All of that has ramifications for the residents who had already lived there. And even sometimes if the residents think that this is for them, history will show them very shortly that these new shiny buildings or exotic stores or boutique stores are not meant for them as a clientele, right? Because what happens is that these stores and these new commercial spaces and these new higher rental places means that taxes go up. They mean that rents go up. They mean that utility payments go up. They mean that groceries go up. And people start to lose the very social fabric that they had, even if it was a poor and working class neighborhood. I think Mr. Benson brought up something quite important when he talked about community on the micro level. People don't understand that poor and working class communities, with all the problems that they have, right, in terms of worrying about violence and poverty and jobs and so forth, still have created a sense of community. Whereas things like what he said, my mom's knew who she could drop me off with, right, in the projects or whatever, or who somebody could borrow a dime from because they needed something, or who could watch their car, who could lend them a couple of dollars, who could do different things for them. It's not like a perfect living situation by any stretch of the imagination. But it goes back to the central point that if you don't control it, if you don't own it, then it's really not meant for you, right? Because these decisions about how neighborhoods get changed are not being made by the neighborhood residents. They're being made by developers downtown. They're being made by elected officials, right? And they're making the decisions on what zoning laws get changed and how that impacts or affects a community. And Atlanta's the perfect example of a place that under Black leadership, right, that claims to be what's the term that we use here, you know, like the center of, like, you know, Black life in the United States is a better term. I'm forgetting it right now. Under Black leadership for 50 years, Atlanta has gone from a 60%, over 60% Black population, the Black Mecca is the term I was looking for, but over a 60% Black population to one that's barely 50%, where all the public housing has been destroyed, where poor folks were paid to move out of town in order to make way for the Olympics and new building and so forth, right? So again, this talk around community, but class divide and interest should show us that there are people who may look like us, but who don't necessarily have the interests of the larger community at heart. And so gentrification is a way in which a new class, a new race, or the majority race, is usually ushered in under the guise of making a community look better, cleaner parks and so forth, dog parks, more biking lanes and so forth. But those things ultimately show that what happens is when these folks move in, the folks who own the homes, they want to charge more for the homes that they're renting them. The tax base increases again, people are forced out. And even when you sell at a higher rate than when you bought, you usually can't afford to still live in the city, but you're taking that money and moving outside the city. And so you're losing access to jobs, access to public transportation, access to social service that you had when you lived closer to the inner city that you were in. So I don't think gentrification is something that we can play with in terms of trying to suggest that there's a positive sort of underbelly to it, because it's not something that we as a people control when folks decide what change is going to happen to the community.
Can I jump in on that?
Yes, sir.
With Mr. Franklin, I'm not going to disagree with you because, you know, you're well versed and studied in it.
You can disagree, brother.
I will say this based off of my own experience, right? So you were talking about gentrification being a negative source because we don't control it. Now, if we were to control it, I see where the positive can be. But I can tell you this off of my own personal experience. When there's time for town council meetings or city council meetings, people don't show up that look like me, like that. It's me, and especially not my age group. When it comes to county council, or if you're, you know, dealing with any type of task force that the governor's dealing with, and these meetings where economic development is happening, not when you just see it, but a year prior, we're not at the table. Not only are we not at the table, not a lot of us are not at the table, they're not interested in being at the table, because I invite individuals often to certain meetings to say, hey, this is what's going on. This is how we control the narrative. This is how we get involved above what's going on within in town development. I give you a perfect example right now in Newcastle County, where Taman lives. They have a $15 million project that's going on, and they're intentionally looking for minority business owners or contractors to participate in the bidding and getting the project. The issue is they're not in a position financially. Our company has been introduced to help with bonding, to help navigate individuals, put them in a position where they can get bonded for even a portion of the project. And so what I'm seeing is, what frustrates me in regards to it is, we'll have gentrification come into our neighborhoods or whatever, but we've lived in the neighborhood for 20 or 30 years, and we'll watch the dilapidated buildings continue to crumble. We do nothing with them. And then also, individuals that are, you want to call the dope boys or whatever, they want to claim blocks or whatever the case may be, but they don't pull their money together and say, hey, we're going to at least clean up this block and make it residential for our families to be able to thrive and clean up and see some potential in economic development. So I've seen both sides of the coin in regards to it. Once again, like you said, and I'm never for individuals that's lived there for a number of years to get pushed out, rents to be pushed above where, you know what I mean, the economic rate is for them to be even to afford. But I will also say, we as, if you want to talk about the Black race or Black community, we kind of have a responsibility to say, hey, we're going to police our own neighborhoods, and we're going to pool our money together and get with individuals and start buying up some of these buildings. And this is happening right here in Seaford, where we have some Black minorities that's starting to buy up some of these dilapidated properties and put their money where their mouth is to make some change. And I'm happy to see that happen. But, and I'm sure on a bigger scale in Brooklyn, it's totally different. But for in a small town, I can tell you, man, it's like pulling teeth to get individuals at the table to even just sit at the meeting to have a voice. They have no desire or interest in it, but then will complain when things, doesn't go in their favor.
Can I chime in? Yep. Can I chime in before? I see both points. And me being a person who has been into real estate, I see it as to where we don't have, in a sense, the lack of resources coming together to do the gentrification. Because when I think of gentrification, I think of the actual definition, which is pretty much turning a bad neighborhood into a middle class good neighborhood. And the thing is controlling.
Sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. It's not the definition, but I will let you finish, and then I would retort.
Understood. But in my thought process is pretty much fixing up our neighborhoods and being the ones that control the narrative, and resourcing our tools together, whether it be with realtors, whether it be with developers, whether it be with contractors and things of that sort. I think that one of the narratives is that we don't own. And that comes to ownership. And when we even talking about fixing up those neighborhoods, the homeowners can actually benefit off that as far as the equity is concerned, to where if they want to actually sell their house, it's actually worth more now that you fixed up the neighborhood, and now you've actually promoted that wealth vehicle of using that equity to actually start purchasing up other properties in the neighborhood, to where people within the neighborhood own the neighborhood versus outside coming in. So that's just my take on it.
You go and speak, Mr. Franklin.
Okay. So quickly, the term gentrification is a European word. It speaks about the gentry class, and it's applied as within the modern context as a way of expressing when one group of folks move into a community that have more resources, and it forces other folks to move out. So the term is not a term that, in my opinion, that I think we should seek to reclaim or seek to put some value into. It's a term that's meant to suggest that somebody with more power is taking community resources or taking away, let's say, property or resources and doing something new with them, but it doesn't necessarily include the folks who are already there. I mean, you can talk about urban renewal, or you can talk about helping a neighborhood do better and so forth. And I would agree. I think every community wants to look better if it's a poor and or oppressed community. And that's not even the point of it, right? I think every community wants that. I would suggest that we, as folks who are saying we are concerned about our communities, as organizers, as activists, that when we see folks not doing, our role is to continually try to convince people to do. No one is suggesting that poor communities already have their stuff together. If so, then we wouldn't be in the position that we're in today. Our role as folks who are saying that we are concerned about the community is to understand and have the wherewithal to say, these are the conditions that exist. These are the ways in which people act under these conditions. What are we bringing to help change the ways and the ideas that people have and help them fight to make a stronger community? What are the educational programs? What are the youth programs? What are the recreational programs? What is the political education that we are bringing to the community that says that you have a role, the essential role in fighting to make things different, as opposed to pointing out what I would say is the obvious, that our community ain't got its shit together, excuse my French, right? So I think that is something that is obviously there. It's indicative of what our struggle is, right? So we can't blame poor people for being poor when there's a history as to why these folks are poor in the first place, right? That if we take the time to study, we should certainly understand that. So for me, I agree that there should be folks not only at these city council meetings, we should be figuring out how to buy back the block, right? We should be figuring all of that out, but we should be figuring it out not in a way that continues to create a division amongst our people, again, speaking about community, so that some new class of Black homeowners or Black commercial homeowner or Black commercial owners come in and start dominating and don't have the respect to how to operate within that present community and the folks that were there. But how do we create, and again, I'm thinking of this as us as organizers and people who are concerned about our community, not folks who are seeking profit, right? How do we get into those communities and create things like land trusts, which create shared ownership of the ground, right? And bring down housing costs and stabilize those things so that they're not subject to market conditions, right? How do we create cooperative, as in cooperative grocery stores, which again are something that is community owned or owned by a larger section of people. And so those folks have a bigger role than just one or two individuals who get to decide, let's just put this Kroger's here, let's put this Whole Foods here, let's put this Walmart here, and then let's give a few jobs here and tell everybody this is community improvement, but it's minimum wage jobs, right? It's jobs with no health insurance jobs. So it's really no improvement, even if there's a shiny new building, because it does really nothing, right, to improve our social and economic conditions. So that's my argument, is more that there's a systemic issue at hand that we have to attack. This is not about what individuals do and don't do exclusively. This is more of an issue around why are we in the condition that we are in? And when we understand that, then we will create the appropriate solutions that will benefit more of us, as opposed to thinking that, as the sister was pointing out earlier, thinking that us doing what white people do is the appropriate response to how we cure our ills. It's not. We're perpetuating something just with a different skin color on it, right? We have to think outside that box. We have to do more study, more reading, more practice, more falling on our faces, more getting up after we make the mistakes, more improving. And for me, that's how we go about improving our community and start thinking about ways in which we bring socio-economic differences, as opposed to just critiquing what we don't do, but figuring out what we need to do to make get those folks increasingly involved.
Ms. Cairo, did you have anything? Oh, go to you have something.
I just wanted to thank you. You made me look at some things in a different light, to be quite honest. That's all I had.
Ms. Cairo, did you have something to add to the subject? Okay. So one of the questions I had that I thought of when you guys were talking, and Taman said, like, we get like introverts who don't really want to offend their friends. The question I had is, what would you say to somebody who wants to do activism or wants to do community activism, who has a fear of offending people? What would you guys say about that?
chances are you're going to offend somebody. I mean, you're not going to make everybody happy because somebody's going to tell you, well, you should have did it this way, or you didn't think about doing it this way, or whatever the case may be. And chances are they're probably right because you have your vision, right, of what you're trying to accomplish. And that's why it's great to have a team of individuals to help you with those blind spots that you may have not thought of. I love working with women because a lot of times us as men will cast a vision, but women, they have the intricate details that they'll put in place that you will miss a lot of times, you know. So what I'll say to people is chances, you know, think about politics. You know, when you talk about the debates and the battles that individuals talk about individuals' records, well, I would say, you know, number one, if you're trying to make a difference and, you know, change, one, you have to look at the time period that individuals trying to make that change in. And, you know, probably years down the road, you'll be like, you know what, I probably would have did that different if I know what I know now. Or, you know, my intent was this, but it ended up being this. It turned out to be this, right? And we can say that all in our personal lives. You know, that's not even dealing with community, but that's just whether it's parenting, career choice, whatever the case may be. Sometimes you just make bad decisions, even though your intent was in the right direction. So I would say jump in. You're probably going to offend somebody, but don't allow that to discourage you. Dust yourself off. If you do make a boo-boo, apologize. Hey, I made a mistake. My intent was this. I didn't realize that this was the case. However, do you mind helping me, you know, correcting this wrong? Obviously, you have the information or you have the wherewithal and know-how. Let's do it together. You know, I have some resources, you have some resources. Let's pull it together and, you know, go forward for the same, you know, I mean, the vision that, you know, we're both trying to see.
Good.
Can you repeat the question? I think I received it wrong. I'm thinking that I would be offending if you're an introvert and you would be offending someone because of your activism.
Well, no. So the question, Taman had brought up a question earlier to say, some people don't want to do things because they don't want to offend people. Like he said, and he used an introvert as an example. So I asked the question, what would you give? What advice would you give somebody? What would you say to somebody who want to become more active in the community or to be an activist, but they're afraid to offend people?
Ms. Freeman, you can go. I just still think about that because personally, I guess I'm not diplomatic. I say I don't care. Like I'm not diplomatic. Like if I'm an introvert and I'm afraid of offending someone or a group of people or friends, especially when it comes to dismantling systems that oppress me, I don't care who I offend. But you know, again, I'm not being diplomatic. So, Mr. Franklin, you can go.
I'll keep it short. I mean, yeah, I think it's part of what organizing is. It's a battle of ideas sometimes, a discussion. I think, yeah, you do try to make sure that if you're in community with somebody, that you are trying to, that's my daughter Maya. If you're in community with somebody, you try to be as honest as you can without necessarily being offensive and insulting, of course. But I think that's the very nature of what organizing is. It's about political education or conversations about which way forward, right? What is freedom? What is liberation? And I think those are needed discussions that we should have. Do we think capitalism has oppressed us? Do we think socialism is the answer? Do we believe in communal societies? Whatever it is, I think you don't get to the right answers until you are ready to at least have some discussions about where you may be wrong at. And because I think the brother Benson is correct. Someone once said, if you think the same ways that you thought 10 years ago, that you obviously haven't been doing a lot of studying, right? Or a lot of learning, because you have to shed some ideas and pick up some new ones. Doesn't mean like you lose your whole base, but you have to be able to sort of look at what you've done and what you've thought and see where you can build upon it. So I think at some point it's important. It's extremely important, even as for anybody jumping into organizing, to read, to talk to people. But you have to build your base of knowledge, I think, over about understanding history and how history has been applied and what's happened in the past. and to see where either the mistakes or the victories or the intricacies of what strategy looks like in terms of making things happen. But you have to have some understanding of the area of interest that you are at, that you have, and that you're participating in.
I love it. The reason I asked that question because I'm a big proponent on confrontation, and I think that confrontation is not it's not a bad thing. I'm of the belief that confrontation breeds change. If you don't confront something or confront an issue, how will we know what what we are capable of changing? Like, how will we know? How would somebody know that they're doing something wrong, or how would somebody know that there's an issue? So I definitely agree with all you guys because confrontation is the only way to confront something. And sometimes that comes with being offended somebody. That sometimes that comes with you being offended just based off of what somebody else's views on something is. So I definitely appreciate all you guys' answers because that's one of the things that I live by is just confrontation and it, because that's how change comes about.
Hey, Biff, can I ask one of your questions? I'm gonna ask one of his questions because they're quite eloquent. In your opinion, what happens first, police reform or education reform? And anyone can answer that question.
It's probably, I would say education. Reform definitely has to happen. We're still seeing, we're seeing it on video now. It's been happening, right? I take, for example, with us in the Gentlemen's Club, every year we bring in police officers to speak to our youth, specifically our Black males, just to give them some guidance of how to, properly act. I don't know what to say, properly navigate through the questioning and different things, because my whole thing is we want you to come home, right? Even if you're even if you're right and they're wrong, yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am, whatever the case may be, do what you can. And I'm telling my kids this: come home. We'll fight it another way, and that's that's for all of us. So I would say education on CFA right now, their PD, they're going through different protocols and training throughout the police department to make sure that their officers are trained to the best of their abilities, internally, externally, accountability across the board. And then also working with the community. They have outside resources, community members, almost like a steering committee to speak directly to them in regards to complaints that they're hearing from the community and how they can help better police the neighborhood. So I would say that's education on for the police as well, and then also towards to the community. So I think education is the focal point of everything. Police reform has to happen. I think it's gonna have to happen federally, statewide, and locally. It can't just be one agency trying to do something, and then if you go across town, this other agency doesn't have the same protocols. So I think from a federal level, a state level, and then a municipality level, everyone has to work in tandem to create this change that we're looking for and holding these police accountable.
I definitely agree with Mr. Benson as far as education. I think that is not only the history of policing, but also just knowledge of self and knowledge of the history of Black people in this country. And so to be educated, to understand, to see what we're seeing, it'll give you context. And so police reform is definitely needed. How to go about it, I know there's different viewpoints. I'm still trying to find where I fit in my views about how it should be reformed, but definitely education.
Brother Dom, I'm going to be confrontational. I'm going to take your lead. So I kind of agree. I'm not usually an either or person, but I think education, I think we all will agree that education is extremely important when we talk about what is police reform or what you can do to reform the police, because there has to be some context, as the sister was saying, around what is the role of the police in the Black community, what has been the historic role and what is the current role, right? In the South, the police come out of the idea of slave catchers, right? They caught enslaved Africans and they built police forces out of that. In the North, they come out of the protection of private property, right? And even in the South, obviously they thought of enslaved Africans as private property. So you have to think about what's the role of the police vis-a-vis the Black community and the structures that they answer to, and whether or not an institution like that can be adequately reformed to do its job in the Black community. And so therefore, whether or not a organization, local, but still with local police forces, but still with ideas which resonate for them all across the country and internationally around what their role is, whether or not they can ever intellectually divorce themselves from the racism, the white supremacy, the historical use and training that they get around what they think about Black people in the Black community, to be policing us, right? So my idea about police reform is, people talk about abolition and defunding. I'm not opposed to those things by any stretch of the imagination. But when I think about policing, I think about, again, us having control over any policing mechanism in our community. So unless Black people in the Black community get to decide who's hired and who's fired and who's disciplined, then it's a flawed system. So it's a system that has to be changed, because you have a militarized system, one that operates from a top-down command structure that, again, through its training, is trained to take command. It's trained that Black people are criminals, right? Whether or not that's stated openly or not. As many folks know, a lot of these police officers are connected to some of these white militias, just like in the military. So there's an ideological idea that comes with it, right? To the point of decentralization, the fact that you have a police chief that's outside of the community making these decisions. We should have community boards over local precincts and or sheriff offices, whatever they are, that they get to decide, again, who's hired, who's fired, a residency in the community, and disciplining for those police officers. That's, for me, the only logical reform. I don't believe that police officers can get trained based on race training on how to treat people. So I think that kind of stuff is a fallacy and is being done for the last 30 years as some sort of police reform, but really gets us nowhere. So I think the model in and of itself of how policing is done in the United States and across the world is one of control and not one of generally trying to stop activity that can be criminalized from happening. But instead it's one of control. And this is Khalib, my son.
Hey, Khalib. So, I love, like you said, love you said confrontation, because to me, and I love the whole police reform aspect of it too, because to me, rather I can be a well-educated Black man and still be shot down in the streets. I could be a criminal who's trying to get myself together, who has a past, Black man, and trying to get myself together, living the right way, and still be shot down in the streets. I could be a working woman who contributes to society, sleep in my own apartment, and still get shot by police. So for me, it's police reform. Just like Brother Franklin said, until that system changes, until that thing changes, and we talk about this a lot on our show, Taman and Biv. In 1992 is when we first saw it. We first saw it on camera, and not a lot has changed since then. It hasn't changed since then. So, to me, it has gotten worse. We see it on a regular basis. We had a statistic that we just rolled out we talked about, I think Friday, 365 black people was killed that was reported last year by police, and it looks like it's probably trending that same way this year. Like until that is changed, it doesn't matter what they do in the education system. Just my personal opinion, it doesn't matter what they do in the educational system. I could be a doctor, and just because we talk sports also, a GM of an NBA franchise was still race. He was still like there was racism against him as well, and he lied. They lied on him. So it doesn't matter what your education is or what your education level. If you're a black person in America, you still can wind up probably shot and killed, and then they're gonna try to cover it up and pull up your past and say this is what you did. So until police reform is changed, we're all, as in the black and brown community, we're always gonna be fearful of what could happen to us.
And just really quickly, and I'm sorry if I said I've spoken too much.
Nope.
But and the killings is just the tip of the iceberg, right? Because what's really happening is the level of stop and frisk. And again, I was an attorney in New York, and I was part of a class action lawsuit that sued the city of New York against their stop and frisk policies as being unconstitutional. So it's the stop and frisk, which is commonly at the police discretion. It's the harassment, it's the ticketing, it's the arresting, it's the trumped up charges, it's the convictions rates, and then it's the prison labor that happens. So it's not, so, our community, rightfully so, of course, comes out in the streets around these killings. But we have to realize that the policing system is the tip of the iceberg, particularly around the killings, around how the criminal injustice system treats the majority of our folks. And again, again, like you said, it can be anybody, but the majority of those folks who are in danger from the police are poor and working class folks in poor and working class communities.
I have not a running joke, but I joked with my wife one time and said that maybe we should move to Africa so that way the police actually look like us. And you know what I mean? She laughed about it, but I was kind of serious in it because, I mean, granted, I don't know what goes on, and no, Africa is not a country; it's a continent. And I know that there's different sections and whatnot, but just the mindset of knowing that whether they come from they're bred from a white supremacy system or they're someone that we grew up with, when they have that badge on and they pull me over, my fear is the same, regardless of whether or not I went to school with you or not. And it's crazy because that I have to teach my son that. I have to teach my daughters that's not a civilized world. Whether I'm in this little state of Delaware or wherever I go, I got to teach my kids how to do things. And if we go further south, I got to teach them differently. Because let's be honest, if we get in those little towns, we don't know what goes on. So it's so many things that I think that even with education, and granted, that starts at home, in my opinion, but when it comes to police reform in this country, that needs to be first. I would say that is by far the first, because we as citizens, regardless of class, don't feel safe. So, yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
That's good.
Spoke on it.
Like Biv said, Biv talked about last week, like education, and Tamar just mentioned, education has to start at home. That is like your first teacher. We are our kids' first teachers, so that has to start at home. But what we can't teach is like we're black. Like that's who we are. We're born that way, and why they dislike us or why they hate us or why they're shooting us down in the streets, we can teach them all the right things. Like Mr. Benson said, we can teach them all the right things. Put your hands up, speak to them nicely, do this, do that. We can teach them all the right things. But if that police officer is having a bad day and he decides that there's hate in his heart and he doesn't like black people, I can do all the right things and still be a statistic. So that's why, to me, I think police reform has to be first in like Tomas said, in this country, because we can do all the right things and still end up dead.
I just wanted to get you guys' opinion on lobbying. What are your thoughts on it? Do you do it? And if so, how could others get involved?
I don't lobby. And come back to me about my thoughts on that.
I mean, I too don't lobby necessarily. I've worked for organizations that have been involved in lobbying, and obviously it's a process of seeing elected officials and telling your point of view to them, and hoping that they're going to vote your way. Um, but again, in terms of my own analysis, elected officials far too often are moved by folks who have the resources to support their campaigns in large ways. People who can set up jobs for them later. People can help them move to the next elected office that they're very interested in moving to. So I think there's a place for it, right? I definitely think there's different ways in which you employ different strategies to get some certain outcome. But I don't know if I think of it as sort of a forward-leaning strategy, as in before I begin to lobby, I have to make sure that I can organize enough people to either make calls or go or protest at a certain place, maybe somebody's house even, to make sure that you can show that you have the strength of numbers, right? And that, again, that's part of what community organizing is. Not an end all be all either, but part of community organizing, in my estimation, is that you got to prove that you can pull out the community to scare folks into doing something that's different than what they tell you they're going to do, which is usually they're going to do the right thing, but they don't when it comes time to vote, or they play it off, or it's something that's hidden in the legislation, so whatever. So I think lobbying is part of a strategy, but I think for me a bigger part of the strategies is how well we can enact a form of community organizing as part of as part of a strategy to push people to do things that you need them to do. And then because I'm long-winded tonight, I'm going to say that even though I think we have to engage in electoral politics as part of a stage, I think we overemphasize it as a solution to our issues. Because I also think that until something we spoke about earlier, we start to create these alternative models of development and alternative models and structures, we'll be relying on other folks who we don't have the resources to control, for the most part, to do the right thing. And I think there's always a tight tension around that, which I don't know gets resolved just because you voted somebody in, particularly in how the U.S. electoral system works.
I would say at a local level, Delaware is probably different than a lot of states because you can literally talk to all of your legislators at any given time, including the governor. And I talk pretty often to those constituents. I would say specifically here, I can't speak for any other state. You can get with a group of individuals and you can write legislation. You can write the legislation and find a sponsor to propose the bill and try to gain some traction. I'm not a lobbyist. I know some lobbyists that do some different things around here. But what I've seen has been powerful is individuals literally, they write the legislation, and I give you an example. A colleague of mine, all of the green energy here in the state of Delaware, he wrote all the legislation. He just got somebody to sponsor the bill. He wrote every piece of legislation that's going on with green energy or whatever the case may be, because he's very well versed in it. And you had a group of legislators that came together that are actually, they sponsored a bill. I think they got it passed in regards to African-American studies. As Mr. Franklin was talking about earlier, making sure that we have our history in those books. So you'll be seeing that rolling out within the next year or two throughout the state of Delaware. So I would say getting a group of individuals that's like-minded, that has an agenda, whatever the case may be, finding a lawyer, someone that knows how to write legislation, find a sponsor to propose the bill or whatever, see if we can gain some traction and go from there.
I don't lobby.
Me either.
I don't. I had to look up the definition to make sure I knew what you was talking about. Listen, I get some SATs words coming in here that I have to go back and research, and lobbying is one that I had to make sure I knew in context. But just the one thing that I wanted to say, just the the one thing that all of you guys have said all together, whether it be in different ways, is a matter of pulling resources together and getting with like-minded individuals. Um, and I'm all for that. Um, and I think that even when we're talking about lobbying, if we were to do maybe more of that in this system, I know what what Mr. Franklin was saying as far as being uh, kind of wearing the white face in a sense. Um, at the same time, I'm like, this is the system that we're in, and we have to maneuver or infiltrate to figure out ways to get on top. Um, and to me, pooling resources together and getting with like-minded individuals is a start, in my opinion.
I got a question for Mr. Franklin real quick. Um, do you think we would benefit from an African American political party?
Eventually, yes, I do. I think, Black folks are really tied to the Democratic Party as we speak. Even though, I mean, obviously it makes no sense for Black folks, in my opinion, to be dealing with the Republican Party. However, I think the Democratic Party has captured us as a people, and made promises to us, but they're never ones to uphold those promises and or to put the positions of our people at the forefront of legislative enactment, as opposed to at the forefront of just getting us out to try to vote for them. And I include the Obamas, right? I include every Democratic president since Kennedy who's won the majority of the Black votes, in terms of switching our votes from Republicans to Democrats in terms of the historical timeline. But I think that there should be an off-ramp, right? We should devise ways in which, again, as we've been talking about, we figure out what our interests are, and then how do we persuade others of our people to vote for those interests, particularly locally, as folks have been talking about. I think you start locally. You start where, there's victories that have already been run by grassroots candidates, or what I would consider left candidates. In fact, I was the first campaign manager for Chokwe Lumumba Sr. in Jackson, Mississippi, when he eventually got elected. And we also, as part of an organization called the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, and we elected the first Black sheriff, right? Which, speaking of mistakes, was a mistake. So, but those are the things that we did that along the Democratic Party ticket. But we have to start devising strategies that slowly pull, I think, Black folks out of the Democratic Party, where we can start organizing and training candidates along what is the Black position, what is the Black line for these positions, for these ideas that we want to see implemented, and who do we raise up from amongst us to run for these offices, as opposed to letting people come to us asking us for their vote, right? I think that's a long-term plan, but I think it's a plan that could happen, relatively speaking, within 15, 20 years. And you start with like a political club or some ideas in which you start giving your stamp of approval to particular candidates who have the similar position as your organization does or your club does. And you can raise resources for them and try to help them in terms of canvassing and the rest of it. So again, because I'm long-winded tonight, the long answer is yes. I think ultimately we do need to remove ourselves from the Democratic Party, because we're never going to control that party, right? The moment Black folks get in a position nationally to start to think that they can control the party and change its positions is the moment that the white economic elite pull out of the Democratic Party themselves and create another party, right? So it's not like they're going to just turn the Democratic Party over to Black folks and say, oh, we're going to keep on giving, right? That's not how it happens. If they feel like that party is now threatening what they see as their position of power, as opposed to having you included, but now you're threatening positions of power, right? Then those same folks who give to that party will start saying, that's not us anymore. We are more moderate than that. We need to come up with a third party. And the one thing I will give white people credit for is that they don't wait on other people. they will not be ruled by anybody else. Whether or not that's the right wingers who are now pumping it for Trump, if they see the demographics in America, meaning there's going to be more people of color, and that's the reason why white folks are in an uproar, right? Because they think somehow power will be taken away, even though it's not really an accurate assessment of what's going to happen. It may be slightly more shared, but it's not an accurate assessment. But the mere fact that they think that Black people and or others will have power over them, they will separate before Black people separate. And that includes whether or not it's a Democratic Party, a Republican Party, whether or not that's land, secession, whatever it is, that white people will not be ruled by others, whereas we have been trained that this is the best that we can do.
I love it. I love it. I love all the knowledge that was dropped on here tonight. And I thank all you guys for participating and coming on and sharing a little bit more about yourselves and sharing your views and opinions on community activism and community organization. But today, right now, is the point of the show where we just wrap it up and give our final thoughts on the show and on the topic today. So I'll start off with Miss Cairo, if she has any final thoughts on today.
No, I'm really glad that you guys held this space and we could share ideas, knowledge being dropped. I really was receiving a lot of it. I agreed with a lot with even with the confrontation, just different viewpoints. I think it's needed. If we have a common goal is to have freedom, liberation, and uplifting in our community, we need to hold these spaces. And so I'm very appreciative of you brothers holding the space for us.
Appreciate you.
And really quickly, I appreciate being on. I apologize for taking up too much space. But I appreciate being on. I appreciate being in dialogue with all of you. And I hope that the dialogue, we find ways to continue and even to work together. Like for me, the big thing that comes out of this when we talk about community is next steps is on the things that we agree with. How do we begin to put those things in action in such a way that they benefit a majority of our folks? So I look forward to any future conversations and discussions that I can participate in. And I really thank you guys for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Jeff.
I would just say thanks for the platform. It's been great talking with you guys, listening and learning. And I would say continue to speak on it. You guys have a good platform. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. So, my final thought is
no. You go last because you get real deep. So let me go. My final thought is I greatly appreciate all three of you guys jumping on today. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us. Got a lot of knowledge, and one of the reasons why we have this platform is so that people can share their perspectives, but ultimately come together, especially on our Awareness Mondays, is how we can get to a common goal as far as unity is concerned, especially us within us being Black people, just keeping it 100. And having different perspectives, even though we may agree or disagree, that one common goal is to lift us up as a community. And once we have that goal, we can work around the particulars and everything. And I think that all of you guys displayed that. So I appreciate you guys coming
on. I just want to thank everybody for coming on and joining us tonight. My final thought is more so to the people. Sound like we have a few questions about people that were a little reluctant to join the movement. Just remember, you can have a great cookout. You can have all the fixings at a cookout. Somebody's got to bring the paper plates. Somebody's got to bring them. Somebody's got to bring the paper plates. No matter how small you might think it is, it's necessary. So just remember that. Somebody's always got to bring the paper plates.
And that
I don't cook, so I'll bring the paper plates. Go ahead.
And I love that what Biff said, right? It's something that's small, but you can't eat without it. You can't, you can eat a burger, but all the other little things you can't you can't eat without the something that's something that's so small. um, to my nothing real deep tonight, really is confrontation, right? I want to bring that up because a lot of people look at it as a negative thing, and without it, there can't be change. Without it, people won't change. People will continuously do the things over and over and over again until they're confronted. A bully will continuously be a bully until he's confronted, and then once he's confronted, he probably ain't gonna bully you no more. You know what I mean? So I think that is the theme of today was we want to confront systematic oppression. We want to confront things that are happening in our communities. We want to confront um, just how we view things and how we do things. If we aren't able or we aren't willing to confront the things that are in front of us, then we will never change. We will never be able to move forward. We will never be able to do things that we continuously talk about. So my thing today, my final thought today is stop talking, just talking about doing things and actually start confronting those things that you've been talking about. That's where real power comes and that's where real change comes. And that's my final thought for today.
And he said he wasn't gonna get deep. Go ahead, man.
But that's our show for today. If y'all like us and you like what we're doing, make sure that, again that you go on and follow us um on our Facebook. Make sure that you are subscribed to our YouTube page, listen to us on our Spotify, and make sure that you go ahead and like us on our Instagram page. If you have any questions or any topics that you would like for us to discuss in the future, make sure you drop a comment in our on our Facebook page, and we'll definitely be sure that we'll speak on it. But until then, that's our show for the day. Speak on it, y'all.